You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, world, and welcome to Tales from Hollywoodland, a veritable feast of movies, television, Broadway, showbiz stories, and even a little bit of news and gossip with Julian Schlossberg, Arthur E. Friedman, Stephen J. Rubin, and I'm your announcer who's up to his neck in tax receipts, Mike Faber. Today, we're talking to production designer and playwright Dean Taucher. And now, here's Steve.
Thank you, Mike. As always, we love your energy and your fervor and your vigor, or as John F. Kennedy used to say, viga. Dean, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me. This is sounds like it's going to be fun.
Oh, we'll fix that.
You're a man of different facets. I'm curious, when you grew up, when you were growing up as a young child, did you have people in the business in the family, or were you a fledgling in the world?
No. I grew up, you obviously know Chicago, so I grew up in Cicero, if that helps place me at all. And for the rest of you, when you'd go somewhere in the world, you said you were from Chicago, they hold up their hands like a Tommy gun. And if you're from Chicago and you said you're from Cicero, that's what they do there. That's where Al Capone was from. My grandfather actually sort of worked for him. My uncle was a Teamster rep. There wasn't a lot of theater in the family, but my mother at one point was a modern dancer when, like Doris Humphrey, and I have pictures of her in Columbus Park, and they're all in like white dresses, next to columns dancing. So my mother had the artistic bug, and we were all in the music department, the whole family.
Oh, did you play an instrument?
I played trumpet.
One of the things that I think the listeners might be interested in, Dean, is to talk about a little bit about what a production designer does, what a set designer does, what their jobs are, and of course, as Steve started to say, how you got into that whole field.
The getting in was the music department. Every year we'd make a homecoming float, and that was my life for every fall. And I was an okay trumpet player, but I wasn't going to be a professional trumpet player. And so I picked something that I thought I could apply these skills to, and I went to the Goodman School of Drama and studied set design. Now, set design, everybody sort of understands. You sit at a theater, you look at the set designer, he did everything on stage. As a production designer, you're responsible for everything you see that the camera shoots. It's just not that obvious because sometimes you're on location, sometimes you're in a built set, and sometimes you might do more work making a location look appropriate than you do building a set. So basically everything you see in a film or TV show, not the actors, not the costumes, but everything else, the sets, the furniture, the art, the lamps, that's all under the responsibility of the production designer.
And Dean, I trust you always discuss this with the director, correct?
Sometimes on episodic shows, things are happening so quickly. You're doing a floor plan with him. You're discussing what the needs of the scene is in terms of blocking. But a lot of times on episodic shows, they turn up when it's done and dressed, and they like it. I worked a long time, and there were very few occasions where there was like a hiccup, like, Dean, what did you do? It was mostly great. Roll, let's shoot.
No, it's great. It's great stuff. Dean, I have a question for you. I looked at your body of work. It is staggering. Honest to God. I congratulate you on a career that is remarkable. One of the things I saw was that you were involved, of course, with Sopranos.
Mm-hmm.
My question for you is this, and I do think our listeners would like to know this as well. When you got in, was there anything more to that story than the pilot? Were there any episodes outlined beyond the pilot? Or when you came in, was there only the pilot?
That's a very good question, because now I don't think anybody spends a nickel on any streaming series unless they have the entire script written. So at this point, it was more like traditional episodic shows where the pilot was done and then you get one after the other. I think when I met David Chase, they had written 2 other episodes at that point, but not the whole series.
And you did the first season. So
Yes.
what are the sets that are the permanent sets that went through the most of the shows?
Well, Ed Pizzoni did the pilot, so he did Melfi's office. He found the house and a similar pork store that they didn't let us shoot in. So I designed the back room of the pork store, the back room of the Bada Bing, the family's bedrooms. I also designed the sign and logo of the Bada Bing, and I also did the first concept sketch for the Sopranos logo. And there's a exhibit right now at the Museum of the Moving Image in Queens that has an exhibit of David Chase's original scripts and my drawings, concept drawings for all of those sets that I talked about.
When you got involved, Dean, did you have a sense from looking at that pilot or what it was going to be? Did you have a sense that this thing could become what it became?
Well, I knew I really enjoyed watching the pilot, knowing the taste of the American public. I can't say I know that, but it really felt like a good show seeing the pilot, and I was happy to be part of it. It was great.
What a hook. What a hook.
How did you get that job? How did you had the interview with David Chase, and I do know that Livia was part of I, Claudius, but that's a whole other story.
Right. Well,
Actually, the same story.
I'm sitting side by side with him at a bar. I think it was Soho Grand. And he goes, "What did you think of the pilot?" I said, "Well, it's very impressive." And he goes, "What do you think?" I said, "I think you're doing I, Claudius in New Jersey." And then he sat back in his chair and turned and looked at me. And, then I dusted off my Cicero connection. So I wasn't a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white guy that knows nothing about the mob. I mean, the local pork store, there was 2 blocks from me where I had the first cannolis. The man who owned that got convicted for the Hollywood shakedown in the late 30s. He and 7 other guys. His name was Phil DeAndrea, and all his grandkids were friends of mine in the music department. So I didn't need to do any research about mobsters or pork stores or what a place looked like. So I think
now I'm gonna ask a quick question because you've used the word a couple of times. Pork store. I assume that's a butcher shop.
Well, in this case, yeah. In this case, in The Sopranos, it was a butcher shop, but they also had a side room where they served espresso and cannolis. The place I went to was an Italian specialty food market, but they made their own sausage, your prosciutto, you get your cannolis. It was the same thing.
Would it be fair to call that an Italian deli?
Yeah, maybe. It just like the place I went to, it was things was being sold out of cardboard boxes and stuff. So deli makes it seem like it's a little bit more organized.
Okay. I gotcha. Well, this is not the most consequential question of the day, but certainly I find it interesting, the irony of a butcher shop and the mob. It's just kind of interesting.
Right. Well, that's one of the things I did in the back room. At first I was talking about putting up, a 10-point deer and like they went hunting or they deep sea fishing. And a friend of mine goes, these guys are about slaughter. They're not about sport. So we put up bulls, we put up heads of bulls and pigs and things that you slaughter. And so that was the symbolism behind that. This was a place they slaughtered people, and the back room of the strip club, it's all, I sort of shaped it in a modified, the floor plan is a modified cross. All the glass block windows are tinted like Renaissance churches, and pinks and lavenders and yellows. And, Tony's desk is like the altar, and, the confessional, and the pool table is like the altar. So I was playing with these things that I would never tell a producer or director that I was doing, because it would have led to endless stupid discussions. I just did those things and let it fly.
Great.
Yeah.
Hey,
Well,
Dean, I fell into a movie over the weekend that I hadn't seen in years. But I looked at this movie, and my God, it's an incredible piece of work. And I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on a movie I'm sure you saw called Once Upon a Time in America, in terms of the production design and the look of that film.
Well, it was that's the one that's set in Brooklyn and New York, right?
Yes.
Sergio Leone.
Yeah, no, it looks spectacular. A woman I worked with was one of the scenic artists on it, and I remember, I don't know, it was sort of Sergio Leone's dream of what America was like, but it sure felt great. I mean,
it sure looked great.
Yeah.
And I would like to know too, when you, as a production designer and a set designer, when you see something that's great, what's that like for you? It's kind of like asking a great actor, when you see somebody do a great piece or something, how do you feel about that? It catches your attention?
It catches I hope that it doesn't catch my attention, but it does. I hope it doesn't take me out of the story. If it's a good movie or a good TV show, it just adds to the fact that the show is working. So I'm not jealous. There's so much work that happens. I mean, it would be hard to be jealous of somebody else who's doing a great job. So admiration if it's a good work.
Well, you talked about working at the Goodman Theater. I've played the Goodman Theater, and it's a hell of a great theater in Chicago. But let's talk about Bill Macy, David Mamet, and you at the St. Nicholas Theater, right?
Right. Well, I only did one show with them there. It was called Merton Phil, about a blue-collar family, that was having some issues. And I drew from, again, I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood, and some of the choices people were made were pretty extreme with their colors and the plastic covering on the furniture. And I remember one of the reviews, I don't know if it was from the Daily News or the Tribune or something, and they were like, no, this is sort of an insult, this design. No one lives like this. And I was like, okay, maybe if you're from the north side and you live along the lake, nobody lives like this. But I at that point that I worked on that, I think Mamet and Macy were already angling for coming to New York. So I didn't personally have much to do with them, but I did sort of mess up my New York theater career once in the lobby. Greg Mosier, he became...
Sure.
Okay, so I'm designing another play for Dennis Zacek that's happening at the Goodman Stage 2, and I bump into Gregory. And he goes, Dean, how are you doing with Dennis? I said, well, we've had a few meetings, and I've done a few sketches. I went to the shop to see if I could use some of the pieces that are lying around to be more careful with the budget. And he starts stammering. But what, aren't you going too far? What? I said, And then I started to do a stupid, like, recounting of the relationship between a director and a designer. And he starts going, me, me, me. So I look at him and I said, excuse me, Greg, can I kiss your ring now? He didn't laugh. And then next year he's running Lincoln Center for the next 10 years. So
Yeah.
I had to go a different direction.
That didn't particularly help. No, that wasn't.
No, but I won because I didn't have to work with him again.
Right. And I felt the same way, by the way.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that off the cut show. I wanted to talk to you about the union. You joined the union, a United Screening Artists in Chicago,
Right.
but that lets you work in New York as well.
Right. They were sister locals, and there used to be a third local in LA, which was destroyed by Ronald Reagan and the mob fighting the Red Menace. So anyway, it was the United Scenic Artists Association. It was part of the Painters International. And literally, if you're a member of one in Chicago, you could transfer your membership to New York. So I went from the first day I came to New York, I was working on Sugar Babies. I worked on a lot of Broadway shows too.
Mickey Rooney?
Yeah. And Miller, Mickey Rooney. I was working in a shop, so the major Broadway shows would come through these shops. So, a lot of big Broadway shows.
Dean, did you ever get into the world of Sidney Korshak?
No.
But you know the world.
Somewhat.
One of the most powerful guys that ever lived in terms of making movies in Hollywood, especially when Lou Wasserman got in. And nobody really knows, the public at large doesn't know who he was. And what a wild guy he was. Sidney Korshak, my God.
Well, you did Sugar Babies, and I know you worked on Evita, and you worked on 42nd Street. Now watch this segue. And now you're going to be on 42nd Street.
Damn right.
You've written a play, and on Theater Row, opening April 23rd, I think. Is that right?
Correct.
And let's talk about that play. Arthur mentioned that you've done all these incredible movies and television shows. You've seen, all of us have produced movies. All of us have produced TV shows on this show. We've seen misbehavior, like we all know, but you've kind of decided to put it in a play.
Right.
Tell us a little about the play, which we have to mention is, as I say, opening, and it's movies, TV, and mayhem. Is that it?
Yeah, let out you don't need the and, it's just continuous. Movies, TV, mayhem. It's not an add-on.
I'm always edited, so why not?
No, I just mean it just goes with the territory. You don't have to add it on.
Right.
So the premise, I started writing these stories. Instead of writing a memoir, I started writing these stories from different people's points of view. So some point of view of an actor, an actress, a producer, a couple of teamsters. So they're telling their story in a grieved manner. And as the story goes on, you realize they're the biggest jerk of the story. And so I started writing these stories. I was like, what am I going to do with this stupid story? So I was like, I'll turn it into a play. And the premise, it's a podcast, weekly podcast called Movies, TV, Mayhem. 3 actors that then do these monologues, which underscores the misbehavior and some bad actors in film and television. There's, a murdering teamster, there's inappropriate starlet, there's drug dealing producers, there's, things you've all
Have the names been changed to protect the innocent?
Almost no names are mentioned at all. So,
oh, darn.
Yeah. But, I've shopped the thing around a little bit, and one actor goes, wait, is that such and such movie? And is that so-and-so? I said, well, yeah, how'd you know? He goes, well, I worked on that movie. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Well, excuse me, Julian. I was just going to say, I have worked on hundreds of projects, TV and film. And for the most part, 99.9% of the time, everybody's wonderful. but there's always going to be somebody who destroys it for everybody. And I assume that you've come across those people.
Yeah, I've worked with some difficult people, sometimes for a long time, and sometimes, you know, what do you say, serial abusers? I don't know.
Well,
You
there's
plug along.
in the business. Even as on a film that I was involved with, I remember we had a little trouble with the production designer versus the DP. Those are understandable.
Right.
And I'm sure you've come across that. But one of the movies that I'm quite familiar with, for lots of reasons, is probably a movie that not only did you work on, but it's probably in many ways the most controversial movie that I ever heard of, which was The Cotton Club.
Okay.
Which starts out with a guy named Roy Radin, who was a kid who made millions at a very young age, gets to Bob Evans. Evans gets involved. And the original, I don't know if you know this, Dean, the original deal was that Robert Altman was going to direct it and Mario Puzo was writing it.
Right.
But then, of course, Bob Evans and Altman teamed up to make Popeye. It was a gigantic disaster. Paramount dropped that, and off they went. And the reason he got Coppola, because Evans and Coppola were not buddies because of Godfather, but the reason he got Coppola was that Coppola had almost went bankrupt on One from the Heart, and he needed the money to come and write and direct. So that's how the beginning of it begins. But you're there. With a very expensive sets and costumes. It's a big production.
It was like being part of old Hollywood, because the music and dance numbers were rehearsed in the space. So I'm walking around covered in paint, painting murals, and the showgirls are walking by, and the Ellington band is rehearsing down, the made up Ellington band. It was fabulous. I also had a direct contact with Karen Greenberger, also known as Lainey Jacobs, who is now doing life in prison for murder. And the story, as I was told when we were working on it, the movie shut down, they ran out of money, and Coppola throws this big party in the Cotton Club, invites a lot of the crew, all these celebrities, and shows a rough cut, an assemblage of the movie. And everybody was totally jazzed by it. This woman, Karen, now doing life in prison, and her husband allegedly gave $9 million to finish the movie. They were drug dealers from Miami. Now, the problem is that this guy you mentioned, Roy Rudin, he was the guy who was giving drugs or supplying drugs to the movies throughout New York. So this woman and her husband made a deal, not just with the Cotton Club, but with all the other movies in New York. And the way it worked, there was so much petty cash. It would be the production manager, the accountant, and a crew head. They'd get the float from the movie, they'd turn it over in a week, and they'd be selling all in-house the cocaine to all the crew. And this worked so well because everybody at this point got paid in cash. You got a cash envelope. One was overtime from the week before. The other was that week's full packet. So some guys could go home, give an unopened envelope to their wives, looking like they're being good boys, when they had another 50% cash in their pocket that could blow up their nose. So anyway, this guy Rudin got cut out of the cocaine deal throughout the entire city. And then there were armed robberies in every movie set in the city after he got out on payday, because the production office, they'd come in with hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash, and all of a sudden there's a guy with a mask and a gun, boom. They robbed all the payroll for a couple of weeks, and then cash payments stopped. And it sort of ruined the cocaine business for these producers. And that's why she eventually had this guy killed.
And
I want to just mention here to Dean that I had some business involvements with the Domani family. Were you involved with them in any way? Did you ever see the Domanis? Yeah, they were around. They were involved.
Well, anyway, this woman, Karen, she comes in her costume as a cigarette girl because she was allegedly given a no-cut speaking role in the Cotton Club, and she's holding the chair back, and it had been spelled wrong. She sounded like the Culligan Man commercial. Who did this? Who did this? And I said, look, if anybody can spell a name wrong, it would be me. If it's spelled wrong, we'll fix it. Let me know. I just have the list from last week. Is this the way your name is spelled, or is it spelled another way? She goes, no, that's spelled wrong. Where did you get that list from? I said, go out the door and make her right. So I didn't get killed for spelling her name wrong, but I didn't mess up her cocaine dealing either.
Did you get one of those cash envelopes?
Everybody did. Everybody got paid in cash. And even better, the check receipt on the regular week's pay only had the total for that week. It didn't have the accumulated total for the year. So if you kept your overtime envelope, the wife wouldn't know what you were making.
Interesting.
What, Julian, Steve, and Mike, did you guys see the Cotton Club?
I sure did.
I never saw it.
Did you see it remade?
I saw it both ways.
It was really exciting to see it when Coppola redid it, because the first edit, all these dance numbers, all these spectacular numbers were cut out of the movie, and when he put that back together, it was pretty amazing.
Why do you guys think it didn't do a business at the box office?
Because whoever had the final edit didn't know what they had, and they made a strange movie out of it.
It was so filled with bad press. There was so much bad press about the making, the murder, the cocaine that was, floating all over.
Was it great, Julian?
Was it what, Arthur?
Was it a great movie?
No, it's a good movie. It's a good movie. And it's Richard Gere and Diane Lane. And I think Nicolas Cage is one of his early movies, wasn't it, Dean?
I think so.
Yeah, I think he was in it too. Fred Gwynne was in it.
Bob Hoskins was played the owner of the Cotton Club.
Yeah, it was
certainly a big league movie going in, without question.
Well, you've worked with Michael Mann. Now, Michael Mann is an incredible artist, but also I think he gives intensity a new meaning. So what I'm interested in knowing is how you not only did one show, you did Miami Vice, but you also did Manhunter. But tell us about working with a guy like Michael. He's a great talent, but very, well, I guess Napoleonic at times and intense, certainly.
Yes, I also did a TV movie for him, which was his practice version of Heat. It was almost word for word, shot for shot Heat with a younger cast, which made absolutely no sense. And he did that trying to pitch it as a series, and it never got picked up. And then he released it as a movie years later.
It was called L.A. something, wasn't it?
L.A. Takedown.
Yeah.
He's very difficult to work with because you do what he asks, and then he asks you to do it a different way immediately. It's just like one time on Manhunter, they flew me up from North Carolina because they were short-staffed to Washington, and they're doing some raid with the FBI the next morning, and somebody came up with a sketch. It was supposed to be a gray bread truck with clouds and fish on it with some fish name on it. And I got there like 3 p.m. They go, well, you need to do this. It's shooting at 7 a.m. So I said, well, get me to an art store. And they put me in a garage with a couple of clip lights, and I spend all night painting this thing. And it looked pretty good. It's on the parking lot. Michael comes up and he goes, the drawing has 6 fish in it. You only got 5 on a side. Why'd you do that? I said, well, at 2:30 in the morning, when I realized I didn't have enough material to make the other two fish, that's what I decided. He goes, well, it looks good anyway. And then he turns around to walk away and he goes, you know what? Let's change the name of the fish store. Just as I had an answer that he couldn't argue with, but he had to make sure to let me know that he was the boss.
Yeah, well, I would imagine that I was told, and you can tell me if it's true, that particularly on Manhunter, crew members were quitting left and right because of the way he was operating.
They were on location. I don't know. They were in Washington, Chicago, Atlanta. Maybe somewhere else. And in that period of time, it was being shot in Wilmington and Dino De Laurentiis fake studios.
Yeah.
All the sets were done, built, painted. There wasn't one bit of furniture or dressing in any of them because Melbourne had fired 5 decorators and Michael Mann had fired, or they had quit, 5 production managers. So they sent in John Landau, who was maybe even younger than I was. I was probably in my 30s then, and to be the production manager. And he knew I knew these characters a little bit, and he calls me and he goes, well, what's going on here? He goes, there's all these sets, there's no decorators, there's no dressers, nothing happening. They're coming back here in 2 weeks to shoot. What are we going to do? And I said, well, Melbourne is used to working in New York. He doesn't like looking at photographs or talking to people that he doesn't trust. I said, fly him to New York, have a crew meeting with a bunch of semi-trucks, and I'll have all the dressing in a week. And that's what ended up happening. And John Landau then looked like a hero and went on to an amazing career in movies.
Yeah, producing with James Cameron.
Yeah.
And he, by the way, Arthur, that's Eli Landau's son.
Didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Well, it's also interesting to talk to you about some of these productions you were on, because when you've done the Coppola movie, and then we can now go to Blues Brothers. I mean, you're involved in real chaos in a lot of ways.
Thank you. Yeah,
a lot of ways.
We're working on movies where where the director gets arrested for manslaughter. That's a good place. That's a good place to start from. And I work with him on Trading Places too.
Two movies. Yeah. John Landis. So there you go.
By the way, speaking of John Landis, controversial figure. Do you think he deserved to go to jail, Dean? I know you're not a lawyer, but based on all we know about the Twilight Zone case, do you think he got off?
I'm not cognizant of all the facts and what was presented or not presented. I just know that he was a pushy person, and that what was said about he wanted to shoot, I want this lower, it's not in the frame, I don't find any of that hard to believe. So I was not surprised of that narrative, and that's, I think, all I'll say.
I became very friendly with Eddie Fisher late in his life. Eddie Fisher, who saw it all, to say the least. And one day I said to him, we were having lunch, Eddie, who's the most difficult person you have ever been involved with, in terms of difficult working with? And he said, Danny Kaye.
Huh.
And I said, Danny Kaye?
The sweetheart, huh?
Sweetheart of sweethearts? Yeah, he told me a couple of stories. About a couple of months later, I'm having lunch with a friend, Dwight Hemian, who you may have heard of. Great Dwight Hemian, wonderful guy. Dwight, out of all the people you were involved with, who is like the most difficult? Danny Kaye. How, unthinkable. If you gave me a list of 10 million people who were difficult to work with,
right,
he would be last. That's the image. Was beautiful. Came through.
that's the image versus the reality. Because
That's right.
in the
I think
business,
there was a darkness about Danny that people didn't see on the outside.
Right. Well, not only they didn't see, but it was his image was antithetical. In peace, beauty. It was beautiful.
He's one of the, by the way, Arthur, he's one of the few actors today, few actors then, that I cannot find anybody who could even be close to bringing what he brought to the big screen.
He was great.
Danny Kaye was one of the most unique performers in the history of Hollywood.
But before we go any further, Sylvia Fine, his wife, was the person who helped Danny Kaye more than anybody. Nobody could write the lyrics that she could write. Nobody knew how to write for him the way Sylvia Fine did. So
I grant you that, Julian, but the thing is, his performance was unbelievable. Yeah.
Hey, the pellet with the poison is in the vessel with the pestle.
Yes,
I want to talk about
Steve. What about the flagon with the dragon, huh?
As the brew that is true.
Okay.
But Dean, I got to ask you about Weekend at Bernie's because I worked on the sequel, and I was curious. I've seen the original many times. The house where the boys go out to visit Bernie on the beach there. Where was that?
It was in North Carolina, and I was not part of that part of the production. I was the New York art director, so I was taking care of all the New York stuff, but the build and, most of the movie was shot in North Carolina. So I'm not exactly sure where on what island or what, but yeah, it wasn't the Hamptons.
So I'm interested in talking to you about your play because I know it began its life at the Bay Street Theater in Sag Harbor, where I've played. In fact, I played there last year. And what did you learn from that? It must have been incredible to watch it for the first time and also cringing at times, of course.
Thank you. Yes. I've had a number of cringe sessions, some as recently as a few months ago, but they did a table read out there, and then I rewrote some of it, and then they did it, on the wing, because there was no real rehearsal. They did one read through it at my house, and then they did it on stage as a reading. And I learned some of the stories were too dark and really sort of pissed people off. And I had a structure that sort of took everybody out of the story. I had somebody in the booth who would interject, we're about to be live, we're about to do it, and it just sort of broke the rhythm of the play. So I got rid of that, and they're just sort of nodding to the booth now and making hand gestures, and there's a big on-air sign and some sound cues that let you know when it's live and when it's not. So, and at that point, it was too short. It was, maybe just an hour. So I wrote a lot more after that reading, and then realized it was way too long. Sitting at another reading, in some studio, I'm thinking to myself, well, I would have walked out by now. So I hope it's not there now.
When do you open, Dean?
April 23rd.
You got an advance going, I hope?
We got some sales. We can use more. So, fly out here and come see the show.
And where are we flying to?
It's called Theater Row. It's a theater complex on 42nd Street between 9th and 10th Avenue. And there's, 5 or 6 small theaters in this facility. We're in a 99-seat house, and but it has the pretensions of a bigger space in terms of the stage space. So there's going to be projections and soundscapes, and it's I'm really excited about what the director is doing with the actors, and it's going pretty well.
Now you said you have projections. Is it a set or is it just 3 guys sitting in chairs?
It's the premise again is it's a podcast. So it's sort of designed like some podcast sets are. There's a table where the three of them sit, and then when the monologue's happening, they'll get up and walk to another area where there's a stool and a stand where they can read it. And when they start doing the monologues, there'll be a major light change. There'll be a soundscape that sort of underscores where the story is taking you, and there'll be projections, slides, video that sort of enhance and take you to the world. It's almost like he's taking you to different genres of movies that these stories spring from.
Well, gotcha. Probably the stories are the good, the bad, and the ugly. But,
yes.
But was it a difficult thing to decide who you wanted to write about and what they were? What did you take some out? Did you put some back in? What was the process to get to the final version you did?
Well, there's a lot of other stories that I didn't put in. You know, I thought it was too grim to talk about misuse of live ammo on set. That would just make people think about the tragedies that have happened. So I didn't bring up any of those. But and like I said, one story was dealing with a Teamster who was at one point. We're at a wrap party, and there's a table of the Teamsters and all their Filipino wives at the table next door, because they had all bought mail order brides. Mm-hmm. And so it was on the wrap party for 9.5 weeks, and it was another like crazy loon of a director, Adrian Lyne. I also worked on Fatal Attraction. I worked on Fatal Attraction, then I got hired on Miami Vice. I did the season there, had contract dispute with them, came back and worked on the reshoot, which sort of was the crux of the movie The Player. The Player, that whole story in The Player was about the making and remaking of Fatal Attraction, that the end in Fatal Attraction didn't work because she just dies, and there was no settling of anything. So the studio said, we're not releasing it like that. They made him rewrite it. Boom, she pops up. She pops up like out of the bathtub, and he and his wife have to then kill her, and the whole audience cheers. Yay!
Very satisfying ending.
Yeah.
Probably one of the only times I know that the testing of a movie proved to be successful.
Uh-huh.
They tested it, and Sherry Lansing and Stanley Jaffe, who we all knew, realized that they needed to do something, and they obviously did, and had this gigantic hit.
Yeah.
I'm interested in knowing about working with Francis Coppola, because he's one of the great directors. He's done some of the great work, but it was a tough time for him. He was, as I mentioned, coming off bankruptcy almost, and having all these trouble. But how did you get along? Were you impressed with his vision, or was he too much under pressure to get to know, really?
Hundreds of people working on that job. I've met him a few times, standing side by side with him, but I can't really say that we were working together. I mean, I was incredibly impressed how he shot all of those nightclub acts that were in I was at that point I was a standby scenic on that at that point in the job. So I got to see how he shot, how he organized everything, how everything worked. And then when the original movie came out, I was like, where is that footage? Mm-hmm. And, luckily, he had the vision somehow to save or corral or keep all of the stuff that wasn't in the first movie. I mean, he sort of always knew he wanted to redo it, and was able to keep the raw footage to put it back in. It's pretty impressive.
How did Saturday Night Live come to you? How did
Well, again, it was through the union. I had I'd been working on some Broadway shows, and then that dried up, and I put my name on the work list. And I think I had worked at NBC in Chicago, so I introduced myself. I worked with this guy over there, and all of a sudden I'm the young kid working these crazy hours. The old guys didn't want to work these crazy hours, so I ended up doing the 5th season. And there's no dark stories to tell about that, because I was just working so long hours. There was just no time for sex, drugs, and rock and roll for me.
Was Lauren Michaels clearly in charge?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of long work hours, according to IMDb, you've worked on, 435 episodes of Law and Order Special Victims. Is that you?
Yeah, that's me.
435 episodes. That's 20 years of work. Dick Wolf must be somebody you know.
Yes. Well, he was the head writer on Miami Vice the season I was there. I also did a show with him with John Mahoney and Wesley Snipes called Harlem Eastside Life-Saving Project, or HELP. I also did New York Undercover for over 75 episodes that he produced also, and some almost disappeared series called Right Verdicts with Tom Conti, and he was a lawyer, and his name was Mr. Right. High concept.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't watch a lot of SVUs. My wife is now catching up to all those episodes, but it's a pretty straightforward series. There's not a lot of time for artistic expression. You're going from lawyers' offices to the cops' offices to detectives' offices. What were over the years? What have been the challenges of keeping yourself excited about that show?
Excellent question. Yes. So the worst part of my job was having to design hallways in hospitals. I'm designing hallways so they can kick a door in, because the producer doesn't want to spend the time to have the crew go up a couple of steps. So yes, there are artistic challenges to doing that for that amount of time. But within every season, there was always something different, something interesting, something to get the juices flowing. But one producer who I worked with for a long time summed up very well how he thought about the design for the show. He said, "Dean, nobody cares anything about what you do. They only see 2 inches between two people's heads." So this is when, at today's money, I was probably spending the equivalent of $8 million a year on through the art department. So it was an expensive 2 inches.
Yeah.
Well, here we are in 2026. If you come out to Hollywood, everybody's talking about AI. And how it's going to affect the business. I was informed the other day by a writer's manager that he's not taking on new writer clients anymore, because he thinks because of AI, writers are done. I was very happy to hear that, because of a writer. Thank you very much. But well, I'm sure AI is already impacting your life. How is it going to be for you in the next few years when you design? Do you think it will zero?
I retired 5 years ago. I've never used a computer for any design purposes. I've had staff people like graphic artists and stuff like that. All my drawing has been with a pen. So I am a scribe in the age of Gutenberg. God bless these people who know how to use this stuff. It's a mystery to me. I know nothing.
So you have no thought about how it's going to go?
It's going to destroy a lot of people's livelihoods. It's going to. It's an amazing. It's an amazing thing. I read something in the Times the other day about a man who started selling weight loss drugs. His business is worth $1.8 billion now. He has no employees except his brother. He did it all by using AI software to create contracts, to create customer service lines, all of this stuff, no employees. And he did this in the space of, I think, 2 years. So if it's going to take, it's not going to be people who are in the business now adapting this. It's going to be people who are like native to this world that we don't quite understand how to use, and somebody's just going to fly with it.
Of course, there was a lot of talk, though, many years ago when computers came in. There was talk of it was going to cost a lot of people jobs and all this, and somewhat similar to what's happening now with AI.
Well, in the end, like when I first started doing these episodic shows, when they'd call for a picture or something on a screen, it was so complicated. You had to call in a still photographer. It had to be developed. You had to bring it, and they would just say, "Okay, hold up the photo, and we'll react to it." Then, as the computer came, digital photographs. All of a sudden, we're creating a gazillion screens. All the images have to be created. All of the websites have to be bought because you can't use a real website because somebody will sue you. So all of a sudden, instead of having no graphic artists and maybe you do a photograph once every couple of episodes, there's 2 or 3 graphic artists in every show now churning out all this stuff because everybody expects to see it. What's the screen on your phone? What's the screen on the computer? And then everybody at work is used to like taking a picture, printing it. So like, well, if I can do it at home, why can't you do it at work? Like the boom, 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 boom.
When you were describing your play, movies, TV mayhem, did I get that right?
Yes.
The 3 guys doing the podcast, it reminded me of a show I watched last night. And it's funny because I've been very disappointed lately with TV movies, streaming movies. It's just, they seem to be very overproduced, no storyline. But I watched a movie last night called Mercy.
Okay.
And you guys should check out a movie, Mercy. It basically takes place in the near future where AI has now taken over the justice system. So you're facing a judge that is essentially an AI character. And according to this the key character, Chris Pratt, is accused of murdering his wife, and he's got 90 minutes to prove he's innocent. And it's very compelling. It's a little bit of a bottle show because you're just focusing on his face as he's moving all these images around because he gets to do it. But it's a very compelling little movie. So,
Dean, something here. Not too many things in the history of television ever looked better on television than Miami Vice. That show was unbelievable in terms of its look and the ambiance of it all.
There was Michael Mann understood the technology at that point. And if you remember, tube TVs at that point, the color red and orange would bleed and would leave a fuzzy image. So his whole picking of that tight palette of blues and whites and turquoises and pinks was partly because he hated the bleed of those colors on his show. So he forbade those colors just to get a crisper image. And then it just blew up and worked.
Succeeded.
Yeah.
You're talking about the pastels.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because in terms of fashion, the way Sonny and his partner dressed, it just revolutionized fashion. In fact, I went to a Halloween party 2 years ago as Sonny Crockett, and I found a powder blue T-shirt, a pair of white pants. I was in Miami Vice.
But were you wearing the Cubby hat?
No, I was not wearing the Cubby hat. I'm sorry.
I have a Don Johnson story. So he was directing one episode, so he couldn't scout. There were 2 outstanding locations, one a corner office in a fancy building, and the other a nighttime restaurant with his then ex-wife, Melanie Griffin. So we're on this high-rise, brand new building. The corner office is perfect, and outside there's a terrace that wraps all the way around the building, hundreds of feet each direction, with a masonry parapet wall. And the producers don't want to move the trucks. They don't want one location fee. So they say, Don, could Dean just make this into a romantic restaurant out here. And he goes, yeah, no, that's great. That's perfect. And they all sit back thinking, oh my God, he's cooperating. What the fuck happened? But he goes, oh, we can do it only in two ways. The parapet is too high. It'll interfere with the image of my head and Melanie's head. So either we have to deck this whole deck, both directions, hundreds of feet, up so that the parapet doesn't interfere with our look, or we have to cut the parapet down so that it doesn't. Brand new building, we're going to cut the masonry down. Right. So everybody knows. So he says there's only two ways. And I open my mouth. I said, there's a third way. Everybody looks at me. There's like 30 people on the tech scout. I said, yeah, what? What's the third way? I said, if you cut the actors' heads off, there's no problem at all. So no one laughed. No one fucking laughed. And I wasn't invited to his screening nights anymore after that.
Oh, God.
I mean, come on. That was funny.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Of all the sets that you've designed, all the production that you've done, if you had to pick one that you'd say, well, I'm so proud of this work that I did, what do you think it would be?
Well, I've done a lot of, my wife is a choreographer, filmmaker. She's been making short, it's not a money-making venture. She's been making short dance films that have a narrative story. And some of the work I've done with her where it has more of a theatrical nature, and you expand beyond the reality of like a cop show. Some of those things have been the most fulfilling to work on, and she's very talented and incredible the way she edits her pieces together to tell these narrative stories almost without words. So
we have come to the end of our show, and Dean, you've been delightful. We knew you would be. You have such rich stories. We all look forward to your play. We're going to turn it over to our chief cook and bottle washer, Mr. Mike Faber. Take it away, Mike.
Dean, thanks again for joining us. Your stories were amazing. I want to hear more. This is just awesome.
I'll come back. I got a few more satchels full, and in fact, I have a Thunderball story. Isn't somebody here have a history of?
Yeah,
Mr. Rubin. That's Mr. Rubin.
On the subject.
My office on Miami Vice was at Ivan Storr's studio.
Oh, sure.
Who did the underwater shots?
Sure.
And my office was decked over tank of Flipper.
Oh, wow. Everyone knows the King of the Sea.
Yeah, once a week they had to pour bleach down a port. Otherwise, you couldn't stay there because of the smell.
Oh,
wow.
The glories of film business.
That is awesome. I'm looking forward to hearing more of those, sir. You've reached the end of this episode of the Tales from Hollywoodland podcast. Always remember, we couldn't do this without you. So we want to hear from you guys. Please write us anytime at talesfromhollywoodland@gmail.com. Remember, you could find us wherever fine podcasts are found, and now you could even find us up on our YouTube channel. If you made it this far into the episode, why not subscribe and give us a thumbs up? It really helps, folks. It really, really does. Or if you're listening to us, please give us 5 stars. Also, like and subscribe. That is always the best way to do it. If you're on social media, please follow us up on Instagram and Facebook. Before we get out of here, let's check with the guys and see what's happening next week on their podcast. Julian, who are you talking to?
Next week is Tom Courtney, a wonderful actor who's been around a long time, starred in Billy Liar and The Dresser and Dr. Zhivago, The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner. Wonderful stories to tell, especially about working with David Lean on Zhivago. Wow,
that is cool. Steve, what's cooking over on Saturday night at the movies?
Well, speaking of James Bond, I unearthed an interview I did in 1977 with Christopher Lee, where he talks a lot about working on The Man with a Golden Gun. He played the villain, a very suave villain. And he also reveals what I already knew, was that he was a distant step cousin of Ian Fleming, the author of all those wonderful Bond novels. And what's even more remarkable is that on this little cassette player I recorded on 1977, the audio quality is still pretty darn good.
That is awesome. I can't wait to hear that one. That is awesome. On behalf of Steve, Arthur, and of course, Julian, thanks again for listening. This is your producer and announcer, Mike Faber. We'll see you here next time on Tales from Hollywoodland. Your Hollywood adventure starts right here.
Well, the colder temperatures have finally arrived, and that can only mean one thing. No, that was the last promo, but it still means monsters. This is Jim from Monster Attack, reminding you to join us every week for a discussion on some of the great monster movies that impacted us throughout our lives. New episodes drop at 5 p.m. And remember, Monster Attack is a proud member of the ESO Network.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.